Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan, along with my co-host, Kathryn Peterson. And today we look forward to unpacking a classic from the Building Champions arsenal, the DISC. And DISC tends to be a topic that stirs up a lot of interest, stirs up a lot of confusion, and sometimes a lot of clarity. And we want to drive to clarity. That's always our mission with the podcast. And so I look forward to unpacking a lot of things with you. But before we get started too quickly, let me bring in my friend and co-host, Kathryn Peterson.
Thanks, Michael. This is a topic that's great, and I hope that more people will do DISC because of this topic, but I also am excited to unpack it. I've talked about it a lot in my career, and it'll be a fun one today.
Good. I'm excited too. I'm going to let you tee us off, Kathryn, because I think the risk for me is I get nerdy and I'll get running. So I'm going to let you stay in control of the topics. And then as we go, hopefully we have some nice exchange with it. And you make sure to keep me moving. Don't let me get caught too deep in the weeds.
Yeah, no, I'll push you along if you start nerding out.
Thank you.
So first, just give us the quick preview of what is DISC.
So for most folks that have seen different styles of assessments, DISC exists in a space in which a lot of coaches, a lot of HR providers, and some other folks who through like the ICF and other organizations that use this. It's an assessment that's designed to help people understand communication and behavioral styles. And so it was invented through a whole history of steps that I won't bore us with. There is a lot of background. You can go to the Wikipedia and learn all about folks like Marston and other folks who were involved in studying a lot of ancient Greek and philosophies and ideologies that would have led to what ultimately became the DISC. We use at Building Champions a version of it that is provided through TTI, Target Training International. I'm a certified behavioral styles analyst and through their organization, and I've used that tool now for a good 15 years. And for me, it proves to be a bit of a gold standard. Now, there are different versions of it. So let me be clear. You know, some folks come to me and say, hey, I saw Tony Robbins has a free one online, or I've seen other versions, and they all are rooted in the same philosophical approach, but they don't all have the same information in the report that they generate. I just happen to be a big fan of the report we get from TTI.
Got it. Okay. So I've taken it a few times, and if I remember correctly, it's roughly 24 statements that you put, different orders on. So, and then when you get the results, you read it and you're like, holy cow, how does this computer know me so well? So can you kind of dig into that a little bit? Because it is a little weird when you get those results.
Actually, it's funny the way you just described that. I think for our friends who are struggling today in 2024 with what is AI going to be like for me? In some ways, this assessment was like a preview of what can happen when you really intentionally design a program with some of these outcomes in mind. And you're right. I can't tell you how many hundreds of reports I reviewed, and people read those introductory paragraphs and think, yeah, those 24 statements, there were only 4 answers. All I had to do was put them in an order that made sense to me. And how does this thing even know me that well? That's a totally common response. Yeah. I think the answer is a lot of time was put into the back end of this. So the 2 things I tell people up front when you take it is this thing has a ton of time that was invested in designing it, and now has millions and millions of people that have used it in order to create clarity around the actual results. So we're to a place in its usage where I guess the answer to that question is that's kind of the proof of how well we can use this, because it does tend to produce super accurate results right out of the gate. I mean, occasionally there is someone who says, I don't understand what it's saying. That's not me at all. And what you usually find out when someone has that response, it was, oh yeah, I took that on the day after my dog died. Oh, I took that on the day when when I got fired and I needed to take this to go apply for a new job. In other words, they were in some place of trauma. They weren't in a good headspace. It wasn't a good day to take that assessment. When in a good headspace, I would say we are somewhere in the high 90th percentile of
Mm.
people being blown away at its accuracy.
And so because it's feels so accurate, where do you think people should be using it the most? So what's the purpose of taking
Hmm.
this assessment?
That's really the best question to ask because too many people take this because they really think, oh, I want to see if it really knows me. And they just view it in this one dimensional view of, oh, I took it, I read it. That's really interesting. And it feels like an echo chamber. Like they just were looking at it to see how they rated or scored or whatever they thought they were looking for. I tend to look at it three dimensionally. Yes, of course, I do want you to at first see the reflection of yourself because if you don't see something there that gives you confidence that this accurately reflects who you are, it will be hard to move to the next two. But the second one I want to look at is okay, if that allowed you to see yourself clearly, can you now translate what it's telling you about some of the aspects of those four styles to see other people, people in your family, people on your team, people in your workflow, people that might be different than you? And can you start to recognize their style because of your understanding of your own? And once you have those two pieces, now you can really go for the third, which is could I actually use this information to start building a strategy in which I can communicate more effectively with people who don't have my style? And that's the real purpose of this. It's not to see yourself and just call it, hey, that was interesting. It's not even to use it to say, oh, now I know how my wife operates. I always knew she was nuts, and now I've got the test to prove it. No, please don't use it for that. Use it to say, no, that's how my wife operates. And wow, I didn't realize that the way I operate is creating some of the things that maybe I'm
Mm.
not so fond of. And if I maybe modified some things within a range that made sense to me and could make sense to her, the two of us might communicate a heck of a lot better.
Yeah,
That's the
absolutely.
purpose.
I I think that reading others it's has taught me the most about the assessment. Because I already know how I want to be communicated with. I mean, yes, it's the truth, but that's where you really get that insight. And oh, I get it now a little bit. Because not everybody is just like us. So the DISC stands for something. So tell us what those letters mean.
Yeah, so they're helpful to look at in terms of descriptive words. And so there are a lot of descriptive words that fit each of the four of these, but often what we will hone in on are some very commonly used words so that people can start to see some of the core functionality of the assessment. And so I'd say the two components of that core functionality are going to be around pace, which is, some people have a
Mm.
faster pace or a slower pace, or
Mhm.
how people respond to situations. Either they'll be more task oriented or they'll be more people oriented. So when you think about those two components, DISC is going to be broken up into some descriptive words. D often gets described as a driver, someone who is a task oriented and fast paced person. So when we look at the aspects of the scoring around the D, we're looking at high scores or low scores related to their ability to naturally be drawn to tasks and a faster pace. I becomes more of an influencer category. This is where we might look at how faster pace impacts someone who's more focused on people rather than tasks.
Mhm.
And I should caution us before we describe further, not to describe these as binary, as task or people. There is a whole blend of scoring ranges between 0 and 100 in which you'll see how those blends really determine how we handle all four of these categories,
Mhm.
because none of us are pure in one or the other. We're a blend of all four. But a driver will tend to score higher when they are fast paced and task oriented. An influencer will tend to score higher when they are fast paced and people oriented. Now, in that people oriented category, sometimes people are slower paced, they get an S. That means we'd like to use the word steady. They tend to be a little bit more controlled in their pace. They tend to have a little bit more um, intentionality around their engagement with people, smaller groups, fewer of them, and they go a little deeper. The C, we tend to use the word control, and control tends to be, again, a task oriented person who, again, likes to slow the pace down. And I can tell you that for some of us who are looking for examples of these, let's just say whether we're in mortgage lending, you hope your underwriter has a lot of high C, or your processor, because
Mm-hmm.
those are going to be the details that we don't want to catch us in the tail right when we get to the closing table.
Mm-hmm.
You hope your accountant has a lot of high C, because again, you don't want to file tax returns that have to get modified or edited. Working backwards, you hope maybe you hope maybe the folks that are really spending time with you, let's say a therapist, you hope that person has a lot of high
Mm,
F and has
yeah.
that ability to really slow the pace down and really dig deep with you. You hope your folks that are out building brands, building teams, like your marketing person, you hope they have a lot of high I, because you want them to really be able to get out and connect with a heck of a lot of people. And you hope sometimes that the folks that are in your manager roles are going to have a lot of high D, because the manager is going to be the one responsible for making sure that with all the skill and talent we have, we've got to get things done, and they've got to be done by a
Mm.
certain time. Those are some general descriptors of what those letters mean and what the people might tend to look like in their role based on those styles.
And I've taken it a few times, and mine has adjusted over time a little bit as my role in my work has changed as well, both the natural and adapted, which we can maybe get into if we have time. Um, but why does that change? And is that normal as people progress in their career?
Not only is it normal, it's going back to the purpose. It's part of the desired outcome of utilizing this information in the first place. Meaning, if all I do is show up in my natural style on day one in a marriage or in a job, let's just pick those two because they're pretty common. Most of us understand personal, professional. If all I do is dig my heels in and say, this is who I am, this is how I'm wired, love me or hate me, this is what you're going to get. And we stay in that lane. I mean, we just don't leave it. We just go through life with that attitude. Then our world tends to get really small, because all of a sudden we find out I don't play well with everybody and they don't play well with me. And if I'm not willing to modify some things about my behavioral style and how I communicate, I end up with just a very small sphere. My sphere of influence is just very small. Now, I don't want to describe that as right or wrong. I just want to be clear that that's the path. So when you said I've experienced some changes in those things, that's the evidence of two things that are going on at the same time in most of our lives. One is you're maturing. As you grow, you're learning new things, you're experiencing different people, and your curiosity might drive you to try different things. So you're evolving in a positive
Mhm.
sense all by yourself. And then if you add your knowledge of this information to that very process, you might start making some decisions about the way you're interacting at home or at work with people. And that's what you call the adapted style. That's where we start looking at, oh, so if I set things up a little differently, or if I change the pace, or if the outcome was a little bit more focused this way, I might draw that person in and we might get better results. So my answer would be that's the desired result, that you are seeing those changes, especially if those are being affirmed by those that are close to you to say, hey, it feels like you really understand me in a way that I didn't know if you did, a year ago. And
Mhm.
now it feels like you ask me really great questions, or you're a great listener, or you're a lot more fun, or we're getting a lot more done. There's a lot of different ways that someone might describe that. And those are clues as to their behavioral style and your ability to
Mm.
recognize it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so would you call these personality types?
That's a tough question, because I think that's the common way that people describe them, because these are people. So personality, that seems like a very easy descriptor. I'm always a little cautious to use that, because there are some built-in assumptions about that aren't necessarily designed by the assessment. And all I mean is this is at its purest form an assessment looking at communication and behavioral styles. So it helps keep us in more of a neutral category if we say that's all it's assessing. Once we call it a personality type or a personality test or something that I might hear,
Mhm.
it starts putting a layer of pressure on that that says, oh, that's who you are. That's how you are. And now it feels a little more daunting in the sense of, well, how do you change who you are? How do you change how you are? Like, that's really heavy. And I like to remind them part of the outcome, the experience people might get is they feel that things are changing. Really, all it was your emotional intelligence being able to recognize, oh, when I communicate that way with her, it doesn't go well. When I communicate this way with her, we
Mhm.
get a totally different result. So someone else may think, oh, I feel like their personality is really changing. I would say, no, that's more of a conscious decision they're making on how they communicate and how they behave.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's a little bit like telling someone you're mean versus you're acting mean or you sound
Great
mean.
way to
Or,
phrase that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great way to phrase that.
And so, how often should you retest or just at least look at it with your team as far as to make sure you're capturing those adjustments over time?
Great question. So if we look at this, I'll separate the two and just try to answer them quickly. I think you should look at it regularly if part of your intention was to grow. So I want to be careful because I don't like shooting on people. You know, it's up to you to decide if you want to grow. But if that's your intention, if you say to me as a coach, I want to get better. This is a valuable teammate I have, and I just don't want to spend every day, rubbing this person the wrong way or figuring out that we just can't get the work done because we're stuck in
Mhm.
this weird, funky communication problem. The person who's motivated to that, I would say review the assessment regularly because it regularly will remind you of where those slight nuances are. These aren't heavy lifting suggestions that it gives you. These are very practical suggestions that it gives you. And when I say that, the assessment does give you, in fact, answer keys. It tells you, like, hey, if this is your
Mhm.
blend and you're working with someone with that blend, these are some of the things you might want to try to get more effective results. So if that's the case, review it regularly because it'll keep you fresh. As far as retaking the assessment, I'm always careful to say, let's have a reason that we're doing that because maybe something in your life changed at a significant level. And the reason I say that is people do experience a shift in their natural style when big life events happen. Someone close to them passes away. They go through a divorce. They go through a radical career change to where they're doing something completely different. It's important in those big life changes to see if did that natural style shift, almost like a an
Mhm.
earthquake, and the plates of the earth shift, and suddenly the road isn't where the road used to be, and you got to recognize that. Um, but that's what I would encourage people to or caution people to limit themselves to is don't overtake the assessment to where it becomes this thing of you're constantly trying to change your scoring. It's less about your score and more about what are you doing with the information.
And let's talk about that score while we're on that. Is it better to have higher or lower scores? So each one of those letters has a score. And like for instance, I'm a high I, if anyone can't tell. So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I would go back to my earlier comment and say if we can resist binary terms like good and bad and look for the information that's within that score, the truth is you will see successful people with both high and low scores in all four categories. So I think the key is understanding what do those scores mean and how when combined with the others, because that's the key that is maybe difficult with disc for people to understand is that high I, as you described it, is only one of
Mhm.
your four scores. And it is in some blend with your D, your S, and your C. And once we recognize, oh, okay, the blend of those is really going to show up in the version of the high I that I am. So, in other words, think about this folks that are more high energy, outgoing, and they're very people oriented. So they've got a lot of, I don't know, fast paced. They're not all the same. You can't say just because everybody's got a high score in I, they all, it's just a herd of the same group of people. We see a lot of variation, and that's because of the blend of those other three styles. So I will always caution people, don't get hung up on whether your score is high or low. Get hung up on what does that mean in the context of that weighted blend with the others, because once you see that, you're going to see, oh, other people on my team have a weighted blend too. And strangely enough, even though I scored high on this one and they scored high on that one, once you blended those, we're actually not that far apart. And that's where some of the real opportunity happens when you're working with people. Because like I said, this is not just the what is it about me or can I recognize other people? It's how do I combine both of those to now build strategies? And I want to see people get excited about how does that blend of my scores help me connect with other people's blend and build something beautiful together. So high and low, that's just information. It just helps us ask better questions about what are we going to do with that information.
So you touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig in. Should you have kind of a mix of styles on your team?
That's something that does come up quite a bit when the assessment is provided through a team or a group that wants to look at everybody's, and we want to map that
Mm-hmm.
out to see, okay, we all know we're bringing different styles to the table. That's already evident. But what does that mean, and how can we leverage that in a positive way, and what can we do with it? So yes, I think that's a really exciting way to use DISC. And often when we host teams in some sort of either retreat or breakout, this assessment becomes a very popular tool for us to use as coaches because it gives us a great opportunity to help people feel understood and better connected with each other. So often we'll graph this out to where we show both natural and adapted for each person on the team, and we can see where the weight of the blended styles lands. And sometimes we find out, oh my gosh, even though we're all unique people and different, we have a lot of task oriented people on this team and not a lot of people oriented people, which means we're having trouble connecting with our audience because we just don't have it. And then that can help us recognize, is someone capable in their adapted style of stepping into that opportunity who's already on the team? Or maybe this causes us to realize, "Wow, we really need to hire. We need to find someone who brings that mix to the team." So yeah, team using DISC with teams is really interesting because it really helps encourage people to feel great about what their blend of style bring in terms of value to the team, and how it helps them see better opportunities to interact with other teammates that maybe weren't so obvious at first glance. Because let's face it, you might have a teammate who's really quiet and you think, well, I try to talk to this guy and he just gives me one word answers, and so you might tend to shy away from that person if you're again a high I. And yet you might find out after taking that assessment that you realize, oh, but we both seem to have this area that's actually a little more in common. Maybe now I know where I can connect with that person a little bit better. And now you might slow down enough to meet that person where they can open up, and suddenly the two of you can do really great work together. So yeah, I love it as a tool with a team.
So then with that, should this be a tool that you can use to help hire people?
I get that a lot. I get a lot of people who, as they're hiring, interviewing folks, they'll want them to take a DISC assessment for the purpose of finding out, like, hey, what is this person going to bring? Because every team is like a chemistry equation. You add a new ingredient and it changes the chemistry. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's a fact. So you just want to recognize, okay, what what am I looking at in terms of how this person will affect our chemistry? The caution I would give us if you're using it in that way is, don't use it as a black and white tool. Like, don't go into this saying, hey, we're looking for someone with a high C, and I'm going to throw out all the people that don't score high with a C.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you're not even that far down the road. Maybe you're just like, I just want to see what comes up. And if I don't like what I see in terms of the scoring, we might not have a second interview with that person. My answer to that would be, okay, it is a behavioral style assessment. And what it really gives you is an opportunity to ask really powerful questions. Because as you read through the assessment, if you're the manager who's using it with this new hire or this recruit that you potentially could hire, you're going to have some of the best interview questions you've ever had if you have a tool like this. So I would encourage, if you are going to use it in the hiring process, at the interview phase, use it to ask really great questions. If you do decide to hire that person, now this tool becomes really helpful in the way that you introduce this teammate to the rest of the team, and maybe how you might encourage or facilitate as a leader some of the things that you're going to do to help that person build trust and traction quickly. So you want to maybe play to their strengths. Don't start off doing the things that you know are automatically going to be difficult for them, because you may lose the trust and the traction early. That doesn't mean you won't get to those things. We all have to do hard things in
Mm,
our work, but you can be thoughtful about how you approach those, because you can say to your team, hey, this is where we're going to start with Jim. And once we bring Jim onto the team, I think Jim can really succeed in some of these areas, and once we get to know Jim better, we'll explore some of those other things we're looking forward to doing with Jim. So that's how I see it at the interview recruiting phase, and that's how I see it at the new hire phase. I guess the short answer is it's an excellent tool. Just use it carefully.
got it. And then when you get the results, it's a report that's lots of pages. But one of the things that you kind of highlighted in our pre-notes was the gray line, and explain what that gray line means.
Yeah, so when someone gets their assessment, they'll often flip to the back of the assessment because they want to see the scores on the graph. That visually is appealing to people, and they want to break that down. So we'll go there, and they'll often see, oh, their mind says, well, if my scores are above that gray line, those are good, and
Mm.
those are, and I can't believe that I just did that on our podcast. I gave us a double thumbs up. I guess we just celebrated how good those scores must feel. The truth is that gray line is really not representing a demarcation of good or bad. It's representing, in that case, what's called the energy line. So I like to remind folks that when scores are above that energy line, that is where there's an opportunity for you to assign opportunities for that person that will charge their batteries.
Mm.
So if their scores are above that, the activities that are in that range will tend to be ones that they will do without getting exhausted because they charge their batteries. If the activities we give them are below, they will tend to drain their batteries. Now, that is not meant to say don't give anyone draining activities. It's meant to say if that's part of their job and you know
Mhm.
it's going to drain their batteries, make sure that you build in plenty of space for them to recharge within their natural style. So that energy line, that demarcation that's called, it looks like a gray line on the bar graph, should tell us a lot about the types of activities we want to assign to this person. If we stack up a bunch of activities that fall in those categories of their below the line scores, be prepared to watch that person experience what you and I often hear called burnout. Burnout is real. And when I hear someone describe to me that they're burnout, I often go back to this assessment and we look at where are the activities that are causing that feeling. If they line
Mhm.
up with where those scores are below the energy line, I've now helped them validate it. Suddenly they look at this through a lens of, oh, okay, now that makes sense. I know why I'm struggling because that's just how I'm wired. And it's not so
Yeah.
much of a what's wrong with you. It's now a no, that's just who I am. So as a leader, I think that's why that gray line is important. It's going to tell you a lot about where your teammates are going to draw their energy from. And we want to create a nice harmony between things that charge